Well, the Climate Action Tracker is a joint project with ECOFIS, Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and ourselves. And what we found today, for the first time, we've looked at whether countries are meeting their pledges or not. And by and large, the picture is not good. That if we look at the bottom-up assessment of what countries are doing, add up their emissions and where their policies are headed, then we end up with significantly higher emissions than even the pledges would indicate. And as a consequence, what we've found is very concerning that based on current policies, we're heading towards about 3.7 degrees warming. With the pledges, which are still quite insufficient to meet 2 degrees, we estimated 3.1. So policies are headed for fully half a degree more than the pledges.
What does this tell us about what governments will need to do over the next 2 years in terms of making pledges for the 2015 global deal? Because it doesn't seem like anyone's going to make pledges here in Warsaw or perhaps in Peru next year, but they are going to, well, people say anyway, they are going to make these pledges for 2015. So what does it tell us about how ambitious those are going to be, or need to be?
I think what's really important is that the Warsaw COP is about building or rebuilding political momentum towards increasing ambition and real action. So we can just start here in Warsaw with what needs to be done, but in order to see governments actually adopt more ambitious actions and policies to close the emissions gap in 2020, we need political decisions here in Warsaw that set the stage for governments to come together next year and announce what further actions they're going to take to close this alarming gap that I've just referred to. And I would hope also they would be agreeing a timetable in 2014 to bring forward commitments for the post-2020 period. And these two issues go very closely together. You can't have high ambition post-2020 without an increase in real action before 2020.
In terms of the 2-degree targets that governments have agreed to try and avoid, that's 2 degrees of warming on pre-industrial levels, as I understand it. Why would it be bad if the world went past that level of warming? And why is the 3.7 degrees you're saying it could hit by 2020 by the next century? What's bad about that? What could that cause?
Well, of course, many, over 100 countries here want a global goal of 1.5 degrees. And what the science is showing us, if we look at the 2 recent World Bank reports, for example, is that in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, we see really substantial risk to food production, well under 2 degrees, and in some cases under 1.5 degrees, translating into major risk to food security. In other regions, we see major risks to water supply and water availability. And in other regions, we see major risks just from sea level rise for 2 or even 1.5 degrees. So these are really major risks and very, very costly ones for important developing country regions. Developed countries, of course, will not be accepted from these damages. So that's why countries are pushing for the global limit to be below 2 degrees and better off 1.5. For around 4 degrees warming, some of the impacts that we see coming out of the recent World Bank reports, Turn Down the Heat, show really alarming consequences, particularly for sub-Saharan Africa, where we don't see the capability to be able to cope with the food security issues coming, hunger and malnutrition increasing when they should be decreasing, major risks to urban areas as a consequence of increasing climate-induced poverty. The list is long and very worrying, and that led to one of the major findings, that adaptation to a 4 degrees world may not be possible for many regions and many sectors.
Okay, and in terms of what's driving this rise in carbon emissions, can you put your finger on anything in particular that's caused it to spurt, I guess, in the past couple of decades?
Physically, of course, what we're seeing is the increasing use of fossil fuels, when fossil fuel use should be turning down. But lying behind what looks like the recarbonizing of the global energy system and rising use of coal is a profound lack of political ambition. I mean, that is behind, I think, for example, the reversal of the Japanese promise to reduce by 25% by 2020, and instead to pledge to increase their emissions. it's not just due to the nuclear phase-out. That can only explain maybe 10% of the reduction at the most. It's fundamentally due to a retreat from the will to act. In Australia, we're seeing the rise of climate denialism at the governmental level translated into policy. Denial of the science is one thing, denial of policy is the same issue, but the other side of the coin. So that's a retreat away from ambition and a retreat away from accepting the severity of the problem. So I think that lies behind a lot of the issues. In the European Union, for example, the lack of ambition has been caused by countries such as the host of this COP, Poland, which has attempted to hold up attempts by the European Union to move forward. And I think this has consequences for the regime, the new international agreement that we're starting to negotiate here.